are men getting a leg up?
In option number 1, an intramedullary nail is used, which is inserted into the bone, typically in the tibia, and secured with screws at the ends of the nail to prevent movement and stabilize the fracture. The professional then performs a controlled fracture and proceeds to separate the leg bone into 2 parts.
Limb lengthening surgery explained. A video from Habib Studio shared on Saturday. Harriet, what is going on?
This is this is not for the faint-hearted, this one. So the NHS this week has taken the relatively unusual step of urging people, please don't have this leg lengthening surgery. And the reason that they did that is because there's been this enormous wave of interest, and a growing number of particularly young men are getting this procedure to increase their height. And analysts believe that the global limb lengthening industry is going to be worth $8.6 billion by 2030. So this is a huge growing global industry.
Wow. And okay, I mean, just to really hit the nail on the head here, why are the NHS telling people not to do it? It's obviously painful to have your limbs lengthened. Is it unsafe?
It's incredibly risky. So how it works, just a quick little, just brace yourself. So the leg is broken in 2 by driving in a nail into the bone and then pulled apart. So you cut the bone into these 2 segments, and then you attach this kind of thin metal frame to each of the segments with like these pins in between it that create this magnetic field. The nail has this mechanism, the magnetic mechanism. So each day it pulls the 2 segments apart bit by bit over the course of several months. And the body creates new bone to fill the gap. And it can extend the bones, the thigh bone by up to 8 centimeters, or the shin bone by up to 5 centimeters.
I mean, I don't want to say that's good. It's not good because of what you're describing. But that is, if you are worried you're too short, in inverted commas, that's a significant gain, 8 centimeters.
It is, but it's also not guaranteed. So the risks, bones that are separated too quickly won't mend, or they'll grow together with tissue that's too fragile to bear your weight. So your legs can end up being different lengths. You could end up with a permanent disability, infections, nerve damage, blood clots, sometimes fatal conditions. So sometimes the fat that is expelled by the rod can end up in the lung and kill you. Wow. The risk of complications are estimated to be about twice that of a knee replacement. And even if it goes well, you're talking about weeks and weeks and weeks of intense physio and incredible pain and recovery where you're in a wheelchair for most of the time. So this is not something to be taken lightly, and the risks are incredibly high.
Okay, Jamie, I genuinely cannot remember how tall you are. I can't remember if you're a tall man or a short man. What's your height?
6'1".
Okay, so you're a tall man.
Yeah.
Do you think if you were, 5 foot, this would appeal to you?
I would hope not, just from the risks and everything. But I guess it kind of it's part of a kind of trend, right? What Harriet's describing is the kind of the new advances in surgery are kind of the same as the kind of new advances in hair transplant surgery, in teeth. All of these kind of cosmetic things that have basically made it the kind of surgeries like this more marketable.
Yes.
Whereas previously it was something that, people just couldn't even fathom, or if they could, it was too expensive.
But with a hair transplant, you can say, I had hair, then I lost it. I'd like to get it back. I mean, with height, it's like you never had that height. You're not designed to have that height.
And I guess that would be part of the thing, is that, like, how would the people around me react if I suddenly walked in 7 inches taller, than I was, like, the week before, or even, 2 weeks before? That to me is a mad thing. But there's obviously a culture, constantly on social media about the kind of issues with height. And I mean, I'm sure Harriet and Rebecca would be better placed as people who are looking for men, suitors, I would say, at some point in their lives, whether height played a big issue in their choices. But I know from chats with people in my life that, yes, height is an issue. And so I can see that issue then rearing its head, as it were, if you are short. But I would just point out that we've had loads of very successful short people in society. A lot of
Rishi
Sunak, Vladimir Putin, Nicolas Sarkozy. Yeah. These are all short, quote unquote, short kings, right? So it's not a Napoleon. It's not a, that sounds very patronising to all the short men out there. But it's not a life sentence for.
Well, some people would argue that those guys are kind of or overcompensated
bag.
slightly. Maybe gone the wrong way.
They're a diverse list. But, I mean, Rebecca, what Jamie's saying there is, this is men's problem, and as Harriet outlines, more men are seeking this procedure, but it's women's fault. It's your fault. You've created the issue by looking for tall men.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to stress this point too heavily, but I think worth bearing in mind that primarily women through decades have subjected themselves to untold misery and physical danger in weight loss treatments. Stuff like fen-phen, you don't have to look too far back into history to find women risking their lives to lose weight, often for similar reasons, to fit a societal expectation and to pursue the idea of making yourself more palatable in the dating world, which is what's going on here. But I mean, the short kings thing, not talking about short kings as in short dictators, we're not talking about the Putins and the Napoleons, but the idea of attractive men as being short kings, I mean, that was always a nonsense, right? It's a social media nonsense. I mean, if you think back to Hot Rodent Summer, do you remember Hot Rodent Summer?
I've literally no idea what you're talking about.
I remember Hot Rodent Summer. It was a great summer for me.
It was a handful. It was basically this very brief attempt to suggest that some heartthrobs in the spotlight, your Jeremy Allen Whites, had ratty faces essentially, but were still attractive. But people, it's very similar to Short Kings. People don't actually like men with ratty faces as a class. It was about the fact that a handful of very attractive men had a slightly rodenty charm about them, and Short Kings is just that. It's about how hot men can be short rather than short men as a group being hot. So, and this is, yes, I'm certainly not going to say women are to blame, but it is obviously tied into the way that dating apps have turned dating into the equivalent of browsing Vinted for a specific lightly soiled Topshop jacket you already have in mind. The idea that you are like, Michelangelo filtering away all of the things you don't want until you have chiseled out the ideal date. The idea of pre-screening all your encounters to fit a physical, a list of physical criteria has never been the norm before. I mean, obviously there was online dating before there were apps, and obviously there were Lonely Hearts columns, etc. But people were not writing into Lonely Hearts columns with a list of physical requirements. So yeah, this idea that to get in the door of dating you have to pass these filters has changed things.
Yeah, except they were saying, Harriet, tall, dark and handsome. That is a trope that's been going on for centuries. It is those three words every man knows.
Yes, the thing that has changed, there's quite a few things that have changed specifically in the last 10 years. So firstly, there is the rise of social media and influencers. That has all kind of decreased the stigma around cosmetic procedures and around these sorts of things, like particularly influencers talking about hair transplants or cosmetic tweakments, that kind of thing. So growing normalization of that. There has also been a massive increase in demand because the pandemic, which shut down clinics and tourism, created this pent-up demand because people had more time and more visibility, like to kind of scrutinize the way they look and the way they felt terrible about themselves. Then there's the technological advances, so this magnetic nail that's being kind of driven into your leg. Also the fact that orthopedic surgeons are for the first time kind of getting in on the plastic surgery money, so they're competing for customers around the world, marketing themselves on social media and Google search. And then you've got dating apps, which have effectively made it algorithmically unlikely for a short man to find a match. Bumble claims that most of the women that use its app set their lower limit at 6 feet for men. That rules out 85% of men.
Yeah.
So there's all of these things that have come together in the past 10 years to create this perfect storm. And just in June, Tinder launched its height filter in a way that you cannot filter for weight, and you cannot filter for hair type, and you cannot filter for any other kind of physical attribute.
Can you not? I've not used a dating thing. You can't filter for weight. Why not?
I think that would open an enormous can of worms. I mean, can you imagine, considering how much shtick that Tinder got for their height filter? Imagine if they did. Also, I'm sorry, but like, most men don't need a weight filter. They just filter out women they don't think are thin enough anyway. So it's completely irrelevant.
It's not consistent though, is it? I mean, you either should be able to filter for what you want or you shouldn't. I don't understand why you can't filter for exactly what you want if that's what you want.
It was a very controversial decision by Tinder. But I think what's interesting is that according to this YouGov survey, more than half of people, men and women, say that dating apps should allow users to filter by height. It's the same number of men and women, about 56%, believe that dating apps should be allowed to do this. And that goes significantly higher among people that have used dating apps, which I think that's really interesting, that there is clearly a demand for it. But what's sad, I think, is that survey showed that young people, so under 30s, were more likely to say it was unacceptable. So this seems to go against the narrative that younger people are becoming more progressive, more accepting, more less superficial. It's in fact the direct opposite.
I think there's also quite a serious thing about, at the moment, the technology and the medical side of things is risky. And like Harriet was saying and setting out how it can be fatal. But say in 10, 15, 20, 30 years time, it becomes less risky.
Like
right?
hair transplants.
Like hair transplants. And in some way, we're able to lengthen and get taller through a safe transplant. It's quite similar to the conversation around Ozempic. What does it do to people who choose not to do that? What does it say about society that we then say to these people, look, here's an opportunity that you could be taller, but you've chosen not to be taller. So what does that say about you? I think there's a real serious issue that this could be a kind of, thin end of the wedge thing where if we accept this as actually, yes, there's a kind of idealized idea of the type of person that we are, and you only have to pay a certain amount of money and you get to be that person, we're in really sticky water as a society.
Yeah, and I think worth focusing on the fact as well that this is not new technology. This basic technique has been around since the 1950s. It was invented by a Soviet doctor called Gavril Elizarov, who built the first Elizarov apparatus using bike parts. But he built it for clinical use to heal complex fractures that couldn't be healed through conventional means. It got its first high-profile success in 1968 when he used it on an Olympic high jumper who'd broken his shin bone and ankle in a motorcycling accident. And he'd had 20 unsuccessful surgeries before he was finally able to access this apparatus that reset his bones. And I think, it is a clinical device. And until very recently, the idea that a healthy person who had not been in a horrific accident would choose to use it voluntarily for cosmetic purposes, like somebody who sought that out would be seen as having a mental illness. And frankly, I think when you strip away all of the, the social madness behind this, I think that's probably still the way we should see this. It's deeply unhealthy to voluntarily break your own bones. I mean, that's what's at the heart of it, right?
Yes, but is that different, Harriet, to getting a nose job or getting a boob job or getting a penis extension, or these things we've lived with for 50 years?
It's really difficult to say. I think what's unusual about this is that most of the procedures that we talk about, and we've spoken about on the podcast before, one of the riskiest is the Brazilian butt lift, the BBL, which is incredibly risky and one of the fastest growing cosmetic procedures, and boob jobs and everything from Botox and fillers and laser treatments that burn your face off right through to major surgery like this. It is all on the rise. It is all, and it's been turbocharged by social media and, like I said, the demand created by the pandemic. But what's unusual about this leg lengthening surgery is that it is young men. Like most of the cosmetic procedures and most of these incredibly invasive and frankly some of them horrific procedures are done by young women, thanks to the pressure that is put on women by society to look a certain way. But a recent study that came out in June showed that for the first time ever, young men in the UK now outspend women on tweakments like Botox, which is why people are starting to call it Brotox. So 23% of men between 18 and 34 had Botox or fillers or dental veneers. That was more than women in the same age group for the first time. So what I think that I want to use the story to highlight is not that it's necessarily anything different from all the horrific and risky procedures that women put themselves through, but that for the first time, young men are really starting to be put in the same position. It is the thin edge of the wedge. Like, you will get to a point in society where if you have a certain amount of money, and it is very expensive, it can be £50,000 in the UK, up to 240,000, but you can get it a lot cheaper in Turkey. But if all of these procedures become normalized, then you become the outlier if you don't get them. And the danger is that we start to normalize people paying a fortune to have their leg bones broken, or paying a fortune to have fat injected into their bums, or paying a fortune to have bits of them cut off or bits of them broken and risking sepsis and death. I think that broader picture of anxiety and pressure around the way that people look is a very dark one.